This is Nia Kamau in Fondren Library on September 13th, 2019 at SMU. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Reverend Robin Murray.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Could you please start off, Reverend Murray, by telling us where and when you were born?
Yeah, so I was born here in town in Dallas at Presby Hospital. Yeah.
And did you grow up in the Dallas area as well?
Yeah, so I spent the first part of my childhood, like elementary school, in the DISD system. We lived in North Dallas, close by the old Valley View Mall. It's closed, so that's why I say old. But then we moved to Plano with my mom's job. She worked for JCPenney headquarters, and they built this big, huge thing out there. And so I grew up in Plano from like 5th grade on.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what was your neighborhood like when you were growing up in North Dallas?
Yeah. So in North Dallas, we lived in an apartment complex, and it was very diverse, like race, religion, and it was a community feel. So a lot of people, we were not wealthy, we were making it, and so we relied on each other very heavily to do that. And it was fun. I was a kid, so I made lots of friends from all different backgrounds. And there was, like I said, we were next to a mall back then, so there was like a lot of high traffic in the area. It was a little bit economically better than what I think it, actually no, today it's gotten better, but yeah, it was good.
Okay. What about your neighborhood in Plano?
In Plano, we also lived in apartments, so my mom was a single mother, so I grew up in apartments. But Plano was way different. It was really wealthy. We lived on the west side, which is the newer, more wealthier side. But we didn't, I didn't experience any of that well. But there was housing communities really close by to the apartment complex. So the friends that I made, if they lived in those houses, it was easy to get to them. And yeah, it was different, predominantly white, with some Asians and other races mixed in there. But yeah, it was not a community feel, a little bit more isolated. So yeah.
Okay. And how old were you when you moved to Plano?
It was 5th grade, so I think I was 10 years old. Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your family? You mentioned your mom. Can you tell me more about her?
Yeah.
Any brothers and sisters that you had?
Yeah. So my mom has 2 sisters, and her youngest sister was the wild child. But she and her 2 kids lived with us. So even though I was an only child, we always had somebody living with us. It was usually that aunt, or my mom was very open, so it was a nephew or a cousin or whoever. And then when we moved to Plano, it was just us for the most part. She did eventually have another child, my little sister. We were 16 years apart, which was shocking for me. How can you have another kid? I'm 16 years in the game, so. It was me, my mom, and my sister for a while. So that was growing up. Now I'm married to an awesome man named Ron Murray, and we don't have any children, but we do have a little miniature schnauzer named Wiz. Yeah.
How precious. So what were some of the dreams you held as a child?
Okay. That's a really good question. So I played viola for 11 years, and I was also in theater arts. I acted and was behind stage, although behind stage was really fun. But I wanted to be an actress, and not on television, on Broadway, and I was actually pretty good. But my mom, the way that I was raised, it was get a good job, be secure. Her generation grew up in a totally different time. So I ultimately decided that I would do clinical psychology. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where my thoughts were. I didn't end up doing clinical psychology after about, which I guess we'll get into college, but after about a year in a internship with Denton County MHMR, I decided, like, I cannot do this for the rest of my life. And so I bowed out of that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you are a reverend, so you're in ministry now in the Christian tradition, is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Did you grow up in the Christian tradition or attending church or anything like that?
Yeah. So I grew up Baptist, and when I was in Dallas, when I was in DISD, Prestonwood Baptist Church, which is now in Plano, was then in Dallas. And they used to have buses that picked kids up around the community. So my mom and aunt would send me and my cousins to church on the school bus, or to church on the church bus. So it was Baptist, so I grew up there. And then also in the summers, I went to visit my grandparents. And I come from a long line on my mom's side, actually both sides, but of pastors, preachers, things like that. So we went to church like 3-4 times a week when I was at my grandparents' house. It changed though when we went to Plano. When we went to Plano, because my mom had multiple jobs, we did not go to church as a family, but I did go to church with my friends, and that was like all different backgrounds as far as tradition. Yeah.
So how did growing up with those different church experiences impact you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it just helped me to understand kind of other people's liturgy in church, some of their belief systems. It actually made me realize what I loved about my own tradition. But it was really good to explore those different spaces. Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about faith, but I also want to touch on race relations a little bit for you growing up. How would you describe how you viewed race relations as a child? Were there any experiences that stood out to you?
Oh, absolutely. I'll say that, again, growing up in Dallas, it's like there was a great divide in my life when I lived in Dallas and then when we moved to Plano. When I lived in Dallas, I felt very comfortable in my skin. I didn't see like a lot of differences. Obviously, like one family spoke Spanish, or you saw little things, but it wasn't anything that was like weird or striking. But when I moved to Plano, the kids were ignorant about what it meant for me to be Black. So an example of that, I remember the first week that I got to the elementary school that I went to, there were 2 Black kids, a boy and a girl, and they had just, like, I was literally sitting in the school office, and they had just gotten back from a school trip, and they both stopped and looked at me and like, "Ooh, another Black kid." Like, that's what they said. And I was like, huh? Because then I was like, I didn't know what I was walking into. And then another thing that stands out is we were on the school bus, and one of the kids, we were just talking about hair. And I was, one of the girls was like, I said, "Oh, I don't wash my hair every day." And they're like, "You don't take showers every day?" And I was like, did not say that. You can put I can cover my hair while I'm showering. So just like the little things like that. But as I got older, that went away, and, got to know people and make friends. Yeah.
Yeah. Your necklace is caught in your button. Just FYI.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So what were your school experiences like, specifically like middle school and high school? So you said that you did like drama, theater. What else were you involved in? Yeah.
So I started Spanish and taking Spanish classes in 6th grade, and I loved Spanish. I had developed a really close, my family had developed a really close relationship with another family it was a mixed race family. The mom was from Mexico. Well, not from Mexico, but her family was. And so she would talk in Spanish sometimes. And so when I had the opportunity to learn in elementary or middle school, I was excited. So I was a part of like anything related to like the conversational Spanish, again, theater, orchestra was a big part of my life, just because it's really competitive. There were a lot of students particularly Asian students that, were fighting for chairs. And so what that means is like you have different like chair positions, and the better you are, the lower your number of chair. So I spent a lot of time like practicing and things like that. So when I got to high school, pretty much the same thing in high school, with the exception of being a student's aide. So whenever we had new students, I would like show them around campus and things like that and help out there.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
So did you know early on that you wanted to go to college?
So the conversation, of course, comes up at around, for me, 10th grade. Little nuances. I didn't really start thinking about it until probably the end of my 11th grade year. So I knew 100% I was going to college. I just didn't know exactly where.
Mm-hmm. So where did you complete your undergraduate degree, and what did you study there?
Yeah. So I didn't have like a straight path. And I think it's important to say that I went to an HBCU my freshman year. After I graduated high school, my mom was like, "You're going to go to this summer bridge program at Jarvis Christian College, which is in Hawkins, Texas, which is like a little small town." And I'm a city girl. So literally I didn't have a summer break. Like I went straight there, and it was the first time that I'd been around that many of my own Black peers. And it was a culture shock for sure, but it was an amazing experience that I'd never change. But I decided, like, when I said I wanted to do psychology, I was like, well, I want to be here for a year for the experience, but they didn't have psychology. So I knew I was going to transfer to the University of North Texas. And so that's where I graduated. I did get my bachelor's in psychology, but minored in business management in Spanish.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So what year did you start at, was it Jarvis?
Jarvis. Mm-hmm.
And what year did you start at UNT, and what year did you graduate from UNT?
Oh my goodness. Okay. So I started at Jarvis summer of 2000. So it was June 2000, and I ended at I started at North Texas, 2003, and then I ended in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Awesome. So when you graduated from UNT, did you know then that you wanted to go on to pursue another degree, or did you go straight into the workforce?
Yeah, so when I graduated, I'd been at mortgage company for about a year part-time to help pay bills. And so, and also at the same time, I had realized I wasn't going to do clinical psychology because the goal was to go get a graduate degree in psychology. And so I did go into the workforce. So I was in corporate America for 9 years. Before I decided to actually go back to school. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's a whole story, because that's when I was called to ministry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing a little bit of that story of what made you pursue ministry?
Yeah. So after my husband and I got married, actually one of our alum here, Reverend Dr. Michael Waters, he went here, obviously, and he had started a new church, and my husband loved him, and he's like, hey, this guy used to be my chaplain, we should go and check out his new church. And I was like, okay. So we went, and initially I was like, wait a minute, like, I don't know about all this. But I began to love the church, and after we kind of grew with the church because it was new, and I took leadership position in prayer, and so we would pray every day in the morning, and sometimes I facilitated the prayer, and I just felt a call to ministry, and it was confirmed through various ways. And so Pastor Mike basically was like, hey, you need to think about school. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's where everything started to fall into place.
Okay, and around what time period was this?
Yeah, so as far as the actual, like, feeling called, it was like the very beginning of 2014. Like around January, around that time.
Okay. Was there any particular person who drew you to SMU?
So again, like Reverend Dr. Michael Waters was my pastor at the time, and he's the one who recommended SMU. And SMU had like a day where you could come and take classes. And Reverend Dr. Bill Bryan was one of the professors that was at the event. And he and I were talking, and he was asking me if I knew what womanist theology was. And I'd never heard that in my life. And so he explained to me that it was theology that targeted or considered the perspective of a Black woman. And so I was so shocked and surprised that here this white guy is telling me, a Black woman, about womanist theology. And I was like, wow. And that blew me away. And that, on top of like the feeling of community and just the connection that I felt, is what made me choose Perkins.
Mm-hmm. So what were some of your expectations coming into Perkins?
So coming in, I expected obviously a sense of community. I've always loved people. That's how I grew up, in a community. So I really needed and wanted that community. I also had already been told by Reverend Waters, to expect me to be challenged on my views about God, about church, but also expect that I would get a lot of support to be built up in my views and understanding. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I had an expectation for those things to happen.
Were you able to gauge in any way what SMU's reputation was amongst like the Black community outside of SMU? So like, how did people react when you said, "Oh, like, I'm going to SMU"?
Yeah. So people automatically think like, "Ooh, you're going to SMU." Like SMU had a very good reputation. Like either you had to have a lot of money or be really smart to be going there, and so it was looked at as a prestigious institution. Yeah.
How welcoming was the school when you first arrived?
Amazing. Perkins was awesome. They were very welcoming. They had a lot of systems in place to help you navigate kind of the classes that you wanted to take, where you were going, how you could engage. Yeah, it was good.
Mm-hmm. How well did you feel that the Black community was represented at SMU, specifically Perkins?
Okay. Yeah, I think there was when I came in, there was a good number of Black students that came in with me. We were pretty strong. One of the things that I also loved is the folks that were before me, who came in before me, the Black students, were very engaged, and they were willing to help, give you the secret sauce, if you will. And so, yeah, it was good. Obviously, we were not the dominant, the majority, but it was a significant number of us.
Mm-hmm. So during your time at Perkins, you were kind of a sort of student activist on campus. There was a period of time on campus when you were reported by a local news source for saying about SMU that, I quote, "I want people to definitely realize that there is some brokenness," end quote. And you said these words around your role as one of the organizers of a march and prayer vigil on campus. Will you please share when and why you led this vigil?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was during the time that race tension was really high on campus because of a planned party that was supposed to happen with a fraternity that kind of, for me, that was the starting place where I realized like what's going on. And from there was just a slew, which I'm sure you probably already know about. There was a slew of like comments that were made. And what I found out later, though, is that DeMarcus Allen, he was the president then. He and I are close because he goes to Joy, went to Joy as well. But at the time, what we found out was the undergraduate students were meeting, And the graduate students at Perkins, the Black students, had the privilege of sitting in some of those meetings and actually found out that there was a lot of isolation, not enough resources, things that we didn't know, or at least let me speak for myself, that I didn't know. And largely that's because the graduate students and the undergraduate students, the Black students, there's not a lot of communication. So anyway, to get to the point, when I found that out, we wanted, that's not okay, right, for the undergraduate students to be treated that way. And so we wanted to find a way to connect with them, to show that we supported them, and to show the president and other leadership that they needed to do something to make a change. So a symbol of that was to have this prayer vigil and this march on campus.
Mm-hmm. So what made you say specifically that there was brokenness on campus?
Yeah, so you can feel the brokenness with the Black students particularly. That led to other conversations with other non-white students. And there was a deep desire for changes to be made, but I could feel that the students, it was an age-old song that had been sung before, and the students wanted to see change, but is it really going to happen? And that kind of felt like a little bit of brokenness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So touching back on your time specifically in Perkins, there's actually a quote that you have that's on the Perkins media page, and you said that, quote, "The diverse faculty and genuine relationships with them, access to resources and opportunities to develop leadership skills have made Perkins unique for me." What kind of diversity did you see at SMU, and how did it specifically enhance your time at SMU? That would make you say that there was like a diverse faculty and genuine relationships.
Yeah. So the faculty that I connected with most, for me, were non-white faculty members. And I'll say what was important for me is their willingness to share and to take the time to work through and explain certain things that were not understood, to be able to guide me to certain resources. So there was a Black professor who, she was a woman, Tamara Lewis, Dr. Carlos Cardoza Orlandi. There were many non-white professors that poured into their students. And another thing that's really important is they took like a non-traditional approach to teaching that I really connected with. Very full of passion and direct and honest, and connecting it to practical uses for the theology.
Mm-hmm. What was one of your most memorable experiences as a student in Perkins?
Yeah. Let me think about that.
Maybe one that would make your top 5.
Yeah. It was actually with one of my white professors. It was Dr. Roy Heller, he teaches Old Testament, and he was talking about faith, and basically he like jumped up on the desk and arms wide open and like, I have faith that this desk is gonna hold me up. And I was just thinking, this man just like jumped on this desk in the middle of his lecture. And it was a funny moment, but it was a practical display of what he was teaching and trying to show. And so it was just, that was probably one of the funniest, memorable times.
Yay.
Yeah.
What were some of the resources and opportunities that Perkins gave you that you find to be like very unique and that you greatly appreciated?
Yeah. Yeah, so my experience was a little different, at least I think it was different. So I ended up being the first Black president over Los Seminaristas, which is like a student organizing group for seminary students who are Latino, Hispanic, what term you want to use. But that working with that organization and the office that led the what is the word? The office that supported is a good word. Supported that organization allowed me to do a little bit of travel and to be in spaces with local pastors who were trying to get licensed through the United Methodist Church, which kind of helped my practical theology. What I mean by that is it helped me to see how ministry would look once I left Perkins. And so, and how to connect kind of some of the things that I was thinking about that needed to change in the Black community or that I wanted to change in my ministry with some of the things that were happening in the Latino community.
Okay. So we've talked about some of those like positive experiences, but was there anything that you feel like limited your success as a student?
Yeah. So having worked with that Los Metodistas group and the office that supported them, there was no office that supported the Black students and making sure that there was recruitment for Black students, programs, things like that. All of that came from the student organization itself. And so that was a limited resource that really honestly bothered me, but I didn't dig into that. And also the faculty, while they were amazing and made themselves available as best as they could, they themselves had to meet certain expectations. And so that, and then the last piece, which is financial. So I am AME, which is African Methodist Episcopal, but the school itself is predominantly UMC, United Methodist. And so a lot of my Black colleagues expressed concern for not being able to get the financial resources that other students did get, and that was a concern for them. Yeah.
Okay. So for the sake of establishing a timeline again, could you please share the year that you started at SMU and the year that you graduated from SMU?
Yes, I started in 2014 and I graduated in 2018.
Okay. And upon graduation, you were awarded the Harry Hosier Spirit Award, which is given to a graduating student who best exemplifies the spirit of Harry Hosier, expressed in what is described as his, quote, elocution of faith. I sing by faith, preach by faith, pray by faith, and do everything by faith. What did receiving this award mean to you?
I was shocked, honestly, because I had already won an award 2 years before. So I was like, certainly they're not going to give me another award. It was completely a surprise, and I was deeply honored to be the first recipient of that award. And I had worked a lot and really hard while I was at Perkins to make sure that there was that sense of community. So as I said in the beginning, that's what I expected and looked forward to. I also at least I hope, that I created that sense of community for others in the various positions that I held. And I didn't do it for any awards, obviously, but it was nice to see that others saw that and recognized it enough to feel like I was deserving of the award. So I praised God a lot. I was like, oh my gosh, Lord, you are so funny. Yeah.
So upon graduating, what was the next step that you took in your life?
Yeah. You know, when you're in seminary, it's like an age-old question of like, what are you going to do when you're done? And pretty much most of us, unless you already have your track, most of us are like, I don't know. And at first you're weird saying that because you're spending all this time and money, but then you just get used to it. You're fine. But ultimately I did have an internship with Faith in Texas that year, during my last year, and I got hired on full time. So I do faith-centered community organizing with Faith in Texas.
Okay. And can you please explain to us more about what Faith in Texas is, what specifically your role is?
Yeah. So Faith in Texas is a non-profit organization in Dallas, started in 2014, and we work with various congregations across the Metroplex, all faiths or no faith, and we move for social, racial, economic justice, and we do that through strong policy changes.
And what specifically is your role within the organization?
So I'm an organizer, which means I connect with those different congregations and I help them to understand what the needs are inside the congregation and in the local community. And then we create an issue-based campaign to change policies that will help the day-to-day lives of people. Yeah.
And what has been one of your most memorable experiences with Faith in Texas?
So there was a bill called the Senate Bill number 4, and I think this was back in 2016, 17 or 16. I was invited at a rally to speak, and the bill was not good because it would allow ICE to work with local law enforcement, which effectively would allow for racial targeting of Latino or immigrant individuals. And so I was invited to speak at the rally at the state capitol. And so that invitation was very powerful. Yeah.
I'm sure.
The encounter was powerful, I should say. Yeah.
How did your experiences at Perkins prepare you for the work that you do now?
I know. Yeah, so honestly, it kind of goes back to that, man, that is a loaded question. That's a great question.
Maybe it didn't. Did it? Do you think it did?
No, it definitely did. I'm just trying to figure out, like, what specifically. So first of all, like, the theology, like, understanding my views of faith and why I believe what I do believe is really important for my work because I am working with people of other faiths. And so I have to be very clear and firm about what I believe and be okay with that. And also find ways that the different faiths connect to mine. So it helped me with that. It also helped me with that vigil in March. That did not end in like a strong follow-up on my part for holding leadership accountable. I know other students did, but I personally did not. And so that's when I recognized that you really have to have like things in writing, policy changes in order to really have true effective change. And so that helped me to realize that this is why I wanted to do this work. So yeah.
So as you reflect back on your time at SMU overall, how do you feel about it?
I thank God for allowing SMU to be a part of my journey because I strongly believe that God is like an orchestrator. We do make the decisions. We choose our various paths, but God is in the wings, like working, setting things up. And I never would have imagined Perkins or SMU, but yeah, I feel amazing to have had the experience, to have developed relationships, to have had the encounters that I've had overall. Yeah.
Do you keep in touch with any of your friends or mentors from SMU?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the folks that I keep in touch with that I just love is Dr. DeCampo. She's a part of the internship program there. She helped me a lot. And then actually a few of my friends that I gained while here at Perkins are meeting tonight because one of them is going to be moving for some ministry work. So we're going to get together and kind of a farewell, see you later.
Aww.
Yeah.
And so do you still stay involved with SMU as an institution?
Yeah, not as much as I want to. So having been the social justice chair, I know one of the things that we have wanted to do is to be able to come back and help students figure out how to get involved, and that has been an open invitation given to me. Also, Faith in Texas, like I said, I had an internship with them. It was through Perkins, and so we're considering opening that up as a possibility as well. So, yeah.
Awesome. So, as we start to kind of wrap up the interview, I would like to say, is there anything that you feel I may have missed which you would like to further discuss?
Yeah, I'll say that, I'll say two things. The disconnect between the graduate and the undergraduate students, I really hope that there's a way for that gap to be bridged between those two spaces, particularly for the Black students, because there is so much that undergraduate students are dealing with, and even graduate students. So coming together and figuring out what it is and how can we fix it or change it, I think is important also to develop those relationships. And then another thing is Perkins has chapel every day, and those chapel services were really good for my soul sometimes, and I really wish that more students on campus who do practice Christianity, or probably not even Christianity, would be open to coming, because it was really refreshing. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Reverend Murray, thank you so much for coming, for sharing your story with us today.
Of course.
Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.